Hello, welcome back to another episode of The Gothic Heart. And my guest today is someone I have been extremely excited about bringing on board, mostly because everything that she is an expert in is brand new to me. And it seems incredibly fascinating. So I have so much that, again, I know I'm probably going to have to bring her back because we're not going to be able to cover it all. But I can't wait for you guys to meet her. Today's guest is Melissa Kim Corter, and I will let her tell you all of the parts of her incredibly unique expertise. Okay, Melissa, go for it. Hey, it's Amity, welcoming you to the Gothic Heart, where we explore how to fully embrace your Gothic and alternative self in love, life, and everything in between. Whether you're navigating the dating scene, in a relationship, or celebrating your individuality solo, this is your spot for tips, inspiration, and my own journey from a courtroom attorney to a hollow wedding host. So grab your favorite drink and let's dive in.
Hey, everybody. So first of all, thank you, Amity, for having me. This is so fun. I love it. My name's Melissa, and I'm an author, speaker, teacher. I tend to focus on the dark side of the personality, which encompasses a lot of territory, as you were saying. So sometimes that means focusing on dreams and nightmares. Other times it's personality disorders, but essentially looking at the hidden parts of us and all the different ways that that manifests as part of my research, my client work, and the things that I write and teach and speak about.
It's crazy. And you didn't even talk about the thing I had the most questions about. So I will bring it up. An expert in shadow work, which I didn't even know what that was, and Jungian shadow work specifically, and even a master's and soon to be PhD in this. So it is a very large topic. And if you could please just share with all of us, because I can't be the only one listening, that this was new too, what that is.
Absolutely. So shadow is a lot of things to a lot of different people, but through the lens of the Jungian perspective, let's say. So it all begins with Carl Jung, who coined the term the shadow self. And he was a Swiss psychiatrist and psychoanalyst who had this really fascinating way of viewing the mind and consciousness and what we refer to as our psyche. So the brief version is psyche is the Greek word for soul. And this part of us that we're dealing with, it has these interconnected layers. So we have, you may have heard of the ego, you may have heard of the persona. So there's layers like that that interact with each other. They're kind of layers where we have the outer world and then the inner world and these things in between and how we relate. And so the deeper we go into this sort of framework of the personality, the more we get into territory of what we can't see. So shadow work is essentially working with the parts of us we're not conscious of. Yet we know they're there because we can feel them. We know they exist because we have emotional reactions, we have triggers to things, yet we can't really get a hold on it all the time. It's not something you can point to and say, that's your shadow, because it's not a literal place, it's not a literal figure. It's more of this field. We kind of consider it a field. And this field contains all these different parts of us that are beneath the surface of our awareness. So shadow territory is essentially the things within that we don't have access to with the conscious mind, but through life experiences, we intuit, we feel, we sense, and that's kind of the angle we take when we work on the shadow. So the easiest way I like to describe it for people is it isn't just the bad stuff, because there's a lot of assumption that shadow is this scary thing and it means terrible things. It does include the parts of us that we don't want to think we have. It does include parts of our personality that we've repressed, that we push down, that the ego doesn't want to identify within itself. But the good news is, the beauty in all of this is that the shadow also contains the parts of us we haven't met yet about ourselves. So a more confident self, maybe a new skill, talent, or gift that you want to cultivate, maybe a deeper sense of something within your identity or personality. So the shadow also holds those types of things. So it isn't necessarily good or bad, even though a lot of people, when you hear shadow, think it's this like really daunting, frightening thing. But essentially, it's just unknown. It's unknown territory beneath the surface. And then we just work very creatively to help have access to it.
Okay, that makes sense. So, how do we know when it would be appropriate to do shadow work or when that's something that might be beneficial for us?
Sure, great question. And there's so many ways to answer this. A lot of times we're actually already doing shadow work without realizing it. Sometimes there's a time and a place where we'll say, okay, let's sit down, do some journaling, and maybe work on something, right? Some type of inner work. So that's a type of shadow work. But shadow work can also be when you're sitting in the middle of traffic and somebody cuts you off and you feel yourself kind of brewing, right? With that like anticipation of like, what is going to happen here? And we start sensing these different parts of us emerging. Could be anger, lashing out, frustration. It could also be patience, kindness, like letting the person just go. So it can go either way. But usually we know we're working on the shadow if there's some type of emotional charge to the situation. That's the biggest key. So essentially, working on shadow is working on the things where we have an emotional charge around it. That happens a lot of different ways. We can do this through creativity. We can do this through journaling, through painting, through conversation, through, talk therapy, energy work. There's a lot of different ways that we can work on shadow. But one of the best ways to do it is creatively, because otherwise what happens is the ego kind of knows, like it catches on, and it's like, I see what you're trying to do. You're trying to fix something. You're trying to make a change. I don't want that to happen because I'm comfortable with the way everything is, and I'm not going to let you make this change. So we want to work on the shadow in creative ways. We also want to be very mindful that we're not working on the shadow strictly through traumatic events. That is a style and a type of shadow work, and it can be beneficial. But I have found in my work that we can do it creatively so that it's fun, it's playful, it's transformative, without having to reactivate any previous traumas or impactful moments that we've had.
Okay. All right. And is there any way to know what's going to come out of doing shadow work? I mean, because you said we could have a new skill or we could have parts of ourselves that we don't want to know, or it's just we don't know what's going to come.
It isn't something. This is what makes people a little uncomfortable. Is it's not always predictable. It's not always predictable. But the one thing we can usually expect is whatever it is, whether it's on the side of things that are uncomfortable, and we're working on that and processing that or handling that, or the emergence of a talent or a skill. Either way, we can think of this as freeing up our emotions, freeing up anything within us that's kind of been bound to within that repression, within the suppression. It's sort of like a liberating sense or feeling. So usually the result of not the process. So the process can be uncomfortable. We might have emotions. We might have tears. We might have things surface. But it's usually something that wasn't completely dealt with within the nervous system or processed emotionally. So the process itself doesn't have to be intense and ongoing. The result, though, is usually the sense of freedom, a lightness, an expansion. Sometimes there's excitement. Sometimes they're even in the process of shifting, let's say, emotions that are difficult or confronting anger, something like that, or sadness. Even in those difficult, challenging feelings, on the other side of that is this sense of relief that is healing. It just feels like you finally have freed yourself from this invisible tether. And that's often what we feel like when we're engaging with shadow. We can sometimes just kind of feel like, I don't know why this thing is happening, this pattern's repeating, or I'm in this cycle, but I know it because it keeps showing up again. So the other side of that can be this sense of feeling like I've made a shift here. the pattern's not showing up the same way. Something has changed. I'm not relating to this the same way anymore. I may not be reacting anymore. It could be something as simple as, wow, I used to kind of freak out when this circumstance happened. And now I see that I have some distance from it. I'm a little more grounded or clear. So it is a bit unpredictable in what we may experience. But if we trust that shadow work is part of the process of, we call this the self regulating part of our psyche. So shadow work helps that component, which its own entire job is to bring us into balance, to help us in our lives to feel whole, to feel complete. So if we trust that shadow work is a part of that process, no matter what does come out of it, it usually will ultimately lead to some sense of satisfaction or relief. We will get there eventually if we keep showing up and doing the work.
That sounds amazing. I mean, just that, like, the sense of relief or the excitement or that whole feeling you were talking about when you make a breakthrough, just, oh, that
Right.
sounds wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. It is.
And so you call, I mean, the overarching part, I think the Jungian shadow work is part of it, but depth psychology, correct?
Yeah.
So what else is included in that?
So depth psychology is a really wonderful discipline. There's lots of different psychologies, of course. There's countless perspectives on the mind and how it all works. Depth psychology is one of the disciplines that values that hidden side. So that's a big part of the work, is knowing that there is sort of this unconscious part of us. And along with it, depth psychology really values the arts and creativity. So a lot of times we will use metaphors, we will use symbols, we'll use different tools, creative tools to help people process things. But it isn't only the processing of, those events from the past or traumas. It can also be these other parts we're talking about. Like, let's say you want to hone a new skill, or you want to become more confident, or there's a goal you want to achieve in your life. So what we can also do is use different types of the work to learn how to embody that quality or that skill, how to trust ourselves more fully, to sort of follow those little into we call them breadcrumbs, like those little intuitions that we get that are like, just go this way, make that phone call, do this thing. So depth psychology really values feeling, intuition, as much as the analytical parts of the mind. It really puts a lot of emphasis on the magical, enchanted, beautiful parts of things that a lot of other disciplines kind of dismiss or call woo-woo. For example, dreams are a huge part of depth psychology. They believe that dreams are one of the ways that the psyche is speaking to us to help us in our lives. Synchronicities also. So we value synchronicities. We actually study the science and of synchronistic moments, like the alignment of things happening, instead of just saying like, oh, that's a coincidence, it doesn't matter. It's like, actually, all these really cool things had to come together in this moment. And we had to be aware to pay attention to that thing in order to see it. So there's actually an entire science around that. And depth psychology looks at all of those different things and says, this matters. This is helping you. This is helping you on your life. This is helping you gain a sense of self. This is helping you sort of learn the hidden language of the body, of the mind, and how it relates. Another really key factor that I think is critical in depth psychology that I see is vastly different from other forms. They treat symptoms, pathology, personality disorders, all of that stuff is treated very differently. Instead of only diagnosing and putting a label on something, they look at it as a form of communication. So, for example, depression, anxiety, things like that, that a lot of us, struggle with. Instead of looking at as how can we sort of just medicate this and make it go away or find balance, and it's not about being against medication or anything like that. It's got its place, but in addition to that, it will say things like, "What is this depression? If it had its own voice, what would it be saying? Is it possible to see it symbolically? What could it maybe be trying to get our attention? is because depression often is something about the past, anxiety is often about the future. So if we can look at things symbolically, we start to unwind some of the patterns and reasons that this thing that we're grappling with, why it might be there. And doing that creatively also is just like shadow work, a way of liberating ourselves so we don't feel like we're just kind of stuck with this unfortunate thing. It's like, no, we can actually have a sense of empowerment while we walk through these things. So I just love depth psychology for that reason. It's very holistic. It really embodies a lot of different disciplines, but the whole person. And instead of just focusing on a symptom and treating it, we actually want to get to know the people, have conversations, get to know their hopes and dreams. So it's a very warm and comforting type of a process and experience.
I love that you said that part about not just thinking things are coincidences and paying attention. Like, I do that to my husband all the time. He'll just try to like justify something, and I'm like, no, this, whether it might be something supernatural or something else, I'm constantly trying to do that to him. And I'm 100% on that. And we've talked in so many episodes about paying attention to those little things that pop up for your intuition. So I love that this tailors or goes right into that.
Oh, it's
And
so good.
and I know we kind of did this backwards because I jumped right into all of my questions. So I guess this is backwards, but how did you get into all of this from the beginning? I mean, yeah. So, like what brought you to here? Yes, I know you've got a good story about it. So I
So
probably should have led with that, but
yeah,
okay, it's okay. We'll hear it now.
I love everything always happens for a reason, right? It goes where it has to go. My life is kind of like that. Like, so it's funny because that's sort of how I came about all of this. I just was, I mean, it really does go way back, and I'll kind of give you the short version because it's such a long story. But as a child, I just always felt like the weird kid. I was always into like these really bizarre things. I loved psychological thrillers. I watched all that stuff from like a young age. I creeped people out a little bit because my interests were really dark. Like I wanted to understand things. I had a curiosity that I think made people uncomfortable. And I really think people thought I would grow out of it and not make a career out of it. But anyway, along with that, there were some traumatic experiences too. There was just these layers of events that happened that sort of open that curiosity even further. And I won't get into the graphicness of it, but basically the essence of it is the area where I grew up. It's well known for weird things. So it's actually, they made a movie about it. It's in all these magazines. I grew up on the end of this road that we were the last house on the road, and everything after that was just dirt road, beautiful woods, forest, animals. I mean, it was incredible. And because it was the last house on the road, and during this time, I'm dating myself a little bit here, but during the time, we didn't have cell phones, right? So what would happen is if there was an accident or something occurred on the dirt road, they'd come to our house. So there were these moments of extremes, beauty, nature, connection, and all of that. And then at the same time, people showing up at the door covered in glass and blood and shock, like all the like intense contrast. In addition to that, and again, I'll skip the details, the deep details of it. But at the same time, all of that was happening. There was also some really bizarre incidents in the area that were attributed to different serial killers, like multiple, not just one.
Hey,
And
where is
so
this area?
so I grew up in New Jersey, and the area it's specifically, I was in Oak Ridge, New Jersey, but the road that's like well known is called Clinton Road. It's got all these ghost stories and all these weird things about it. But what happened is like all this stuff was going on in the area. So one day, I'm like 14 by this time, my mother sits me down, and I swear she thinks she's going to tell me something that's going to like scare me straight, and I'm going to behave myself and stop partying and getting mixed up with the wrong people. But instead, she tells me about all of this stuff, how they found things and people. And again, I'll spare the goriness, but it was intense. And instead of it scaring me, I became extremely curious and was like, why? Why would that happen? And why would somebody do that to someone? I wonder, right? And it set me on this path of wanting to understand because they were in reaction. So of course there's fear, there's uncertainty. And even though I felt those things, I felt this simultaneous curiosity that always wanted me to know, like, what's behind that? And I never stopped asking that question. So now, and I also, one little strange thing that goes with this, I had this bizarre fascination with people's basements. So at the time, I would want to go in their basement. I didn't have my own. So family members, friends, I was always like, let's go in the basement. With our East Coast basements, they're moldy, they're stone, they're dark and dank. They are not nice finished basements. But the idea is that I had this natural curiosity again, and I wanted to go see what was in there because usually it was filled with these treasures, right? Memories and photographs and but everybody else was afraid, like, "Oh, it's creepy down there. It's frightening down there." And I just find it interesting because when I got into the Jungian work, because everything is so symbolic that we look at metaphor, like we were talking about synchronistic moments, instead of it just looking at it at face value, we become curious and we say, what's behind that? What is that? And it's interesting because in Jungian psychology, if we take the basement and we think of that as a part of the mind, it's the shadow, it's the unconscious, it's the deepest part of the psyche. So I just find it so interesting, and maybe it's just interesting to me and not other people, but that I was always like obsessed with that part of things in life. And now I just found a different way to do that in work, like in the work that I do and the career that I have and the things I write about. And it's that fear mixed with excitement, but the knowing that the unknown is only scary because we don't have information, right? We're missing something. So if we kind of like just take a step, you usually get another piece of information. You take another step, you get another piece of information. And often we get to this place where it's like, oh my gosh, why was I afraid of that? It turned out to be like the most incredible thing. Why didn't I check this out sooner or start that thing earlier? And I feel like that's the shadow too. It's not against us. It isn't just these terrible things. It's just containing all of this so we can kind of say, like, all right, how do I trust myself here and show up a little differently and do things outside of the box and see what happens. So yeah, it all kind of started from just wandering in the woods and exploring and getting in trouble and just being a weird kid.
I heard so much of me in that beginning too, especially with the assumed we'd outgrow it and
Right?
all of that.
Yeah.
Oh boy. I mean, and a lot of this is similar to a lot of the guests that I bring on the show too and listeners, right? That we've always had a connection in some way to, the spooky, the eerie, the unknown, the macabre, whatever it might be.
Oh, you're my
And
people.
so
I love it.
exactly. Exactly. And so the interesting ways to see where people take it. Like I love the passions going into their careers, especially you. I mean, we've had several people with different, I mean, not what you do by any means. No, this is the first, but that have taken their interest or their alternative passion and turned it into a career or, made it into something that was not a career before. Right. But it is now, or they're making money or they've turned their passion into their livelihood. So, it's great to see that that can happen because I've spent all this time sort of hiding that style or that outward expression part of myself in corporate worlds. And even now I'm only just bringing it out. So I can't wait to talk about what you call the beauty of darkness. I really want to bring that up. Most specifically, I mean, well, I think I bring all these guests on because I want to talk about it and I love hearing about this. But, then the listeners are in theory like us, so they want to hear it too, right? But
Exactly.
for me, most importantly, I have this beautiful, elegant, Victorian Gothic, like the beauty of darkness and combined and the light and the dark collection that I'm going to be launching in October 1. Whoo, guys, it's coming up that I'm going to be launching. Yes. And in addition to the custom jewelry that I do, but this new line. And I just feel like the way you've described, I know I got to hear it from you or I got to read into your stuff. So I'm going to have you tell the listeners like what that means. But the beauty of darkness, I feel like that just encompasses my new collection. Well, it's a sort of a multitude of collections, but just sort of everything that I'm trying to do with the work that I'm doing in the jewelry world, which is different, right? I'm not working on the psyche and the mind, but it's still our outward expression, and how much better you feel when you're able to express a part of yourself versus when I was an attorney and not able to wear those kinds of things versus now, how much taller I carry myself or how much better I feel. So it's almost like I want to say like a talisman to our inner self that we get to express on the outward. Or that's how I feel when I wear it. And makeup too, anything, or fun outfits that fit my personality. So with that, that's how I really connected to the beauty of darkness when I read about it, when I was looking into what you do. So if you can share with everybody what that means and how it ties in, and sort of, I mean, I don't know if you coined that term, but I think it's a beautiful term. Nope. Okay. It comes from somewhere. Well, let's hear it.
Yeah, and it's everything you're speaking to. It's the same, of course, manifested differently in my life, but it's everything you just shared. It's very much this part of me that I knew I had it. I knew it felt very sacred, which is kind of funny because, right, we want to sometimes think of as sacred as like everything of the light and everything that's bright and airy fairy and magical rainbows and unicorns, and that's all great too. And I think of it like the darkness of the night sky, right? You still can have the subtlety of, like, let's say the flickering stars, but the stars aren't dominating the sky. It's like that vast darkness, but together it can only produce this beauty because of the harmony they have. And so there's something about the darkness that, well, here's another thing to consider. I didn't know this until recently. It's just a couple months ago. One of my mentors said, well, you know that everything is born out of darkness, right? And I thought, oh, that's such an interesting way to think of that. If we relate it to the womb, we relate it to the earth, we can relate it to all these like really interesting things. There's a period of incubation that where things are coming together. If we think of, like, we get a little witchy and we can think of like a witch's cauldron. It's like all the things percolating and coming together. It's usually this big black cauldron, right? But I don't think it's one thing. I think it's so many things, but I think it's exactly what you touched on for me as well. It's the expression of this part that it just feels so sacred. And I think of it too simultaneously with the word depth. And I think that's what drew me to depth psychology. So I often feel like darkness can also be these different expressions of depth and, stillness, solitude. But I also think that darkness is a little bit of a canvas. And so, right, and I think this is why for some it's scary. It can be, when I say stillness, somebody else might hear isolation. Or if I say night sky, someone else might think, oh my gosh, I can't see anything. It's too dark. It's different to each of us. But I have always felt more at peace and more at home in darkness. And I think it's a healthy relationship to have, because the other thing when I think of beautiful darkness, there's this term that came to me. I haven't heard this anywhere, and I actually considered writing a book with this title, but I'll say it anyway. The term was radiant darkness. And I just thought, oh, that's so like counterintuitive, right? Because the mind wants to be like radiant darkness. That makes no sense. But I think it's the kind of thing you just feel. You feel with your heart. And I think this is why, and also if we think about energy, like let's say we have masculine and feminine, not male, female, but just masculine, feminine. We have yin and yang. We have solar and lunar. So dark and light is also like attributed to the lunar part of things, the feminine part of things, which sometimes is what's hidden, what's unknown. But when we change our relationship to the unknown, I think we make peace with darkness in a different way too. I think we start to recognize it's a space, a void of complete potential. I think it can have spooky, cool, magical things, like all that stuff too. But I think that often how we feel about it can be, I'm not going to say everyone, but it can be a reflection of potential or our fears, right? It's like anything else. I really believe that how we approach darkness, what we see reflected back to us, is something that the psyche's trying to show us. It's something it's trying to show us. I don't think it's permanent either. I think if at first we look and there's something we just don't like or it makes us uncomfortable, I think that's an opportunity to the shadow work, right? To move through, to process. But once you trust yourself more, and once you've kind of done some of that deeper work on yourself, you make peace with darkness. It becomes more of like fertile soil, right? If you think of the earth and how things grow from the soil, seeds need the dark coolness of the soil to grow just as much as they need to be watered and as much as they need sunlight. I really think we're the same way. I think that there's a part of us that craves darkness. I think it's why we sleep at night, why we dream. And there's something about that to me that has great mystery that I can't quite define, which sometimes is frustrating and other times is like the exact magic of what it is. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense to me. And radiant darkness, I knew exactly what you meant when you
Right?
said that. Like,
It's like,
yes, I could feel it.
yeah,
I could picture it. I completely understand. And I love seeing, well, for those of you who are listening, you can watch it on YouTube, but the passion that you have behind this when you talk, it is incredible. I can see why you've done all of this, research and learning and gone into what you do because just of how you even speak about it. And I wanted, spoiler alert, we're definitely going to have you back on the dreams, the nightmares, the fairy tale. I mean, there are so many things I wanted to cover before, so I'm going to have you back because I want to hear all of that stuff. But right now, I don't want listeners to miss out on, so this shadow work that you keep talking about, is it something we can do on our own? Do we go to an expert first? How does it work, or how would we begin that?
sure. I actually have. There's a couple of great ways that you can do it. They can start immediately that are simple. I will say you're going to want to use discernment. If you know that you're someone that has experienced really intense trauma, we've all had impactful moments, but if you know that that's something that's going to be within your experience, right? I would then say make sure you're supported. You can have a friend or a therapist or someone, only because it's more sensitive. That's all. It's not good or bad. It's just more sensitive. So I'd start with that. Just say, know yourself enough to know, okay, does this feel like something I can explore, and trust your intuition, your body. If your body's like, no, get a therapist, a friend to work it through. But here's what you can do very, very quickly. Two simple things. The first thing, this is a little uncomfortable, so it may or may not resonate, but it works really well. And I have my clients do this, is create a darkness journal. All you have to do is have a notebook. And it doesn't have to be fancy, just a notebook, a pen, pencil, no computer, no notes, because you use different parts of your mind when you have pen to paper. You actually access the hidden part of yourself more easily when you write. When you write, you also drop into deeper brainwave states. You move from a high alpha beta active mind into the creative theta, which gives you access to some of the things that are hidden under the surface. But essentially what you're doing with this darkness journal is you don't have to share it with someone. You don't have to let other people see it. You want to feel a sense of peace. You want to feel safe, right, to explore. But think of it as a place to put all of the parts of you that are really difficult. So think of, like, let's say you're struggling with something and you want to kind of figure out, why does this keep showing up? You would go to your darkness journal and you would just rant and rave and curse and get it out. I'm like, spill the tea, say what you got to say. Say all the things that would never be cool to say in public. Like, say all the stuff that you would never want another human being to say. Give yourself permission. That type of freedom, oh my gosh, we don't really necessarily experience that on a day-to-day basis, because our ego is like, it's this gatekeeper, right? So it sort of is saying, no, 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 you can't do that. That's not acceptable to the outer world. So then what we do is we push everything down. If we give this stuff a place, our compulsions change, our addictions change. All the stuff that's beneath the surface is no longer being cast out because we've given it a home. If that feels really vulnerable and you're worried about other people finding it, what you can do is burn the pages or rip them up after you're done. You don't have to keep it. But that's the first thing that we can do, is just go to a journal like that and just get it out. Second thing, takes a little vulnerability, and it works really, really well. You need a trusting friend for this exercise. And here's the thing. When we do shadow work, one of the main principal ideas of shadow work is we all have blind spots. So there's things in us we can't see that other people outside of us can see so much more clearly. So the idea is you have a trusted friend, and you got to make sure they've got your best interest. And they're not just going to use this as an opportunity to kind of like, throw some digs at you or something. So what you're going to do is say to them, I know I've got some blind spots. And so I would love for you to give me 3 things. Tell me 3 things that you see about me that you think I may not know about myself. Patterns, habits, addictions, whatever it might be. And again, you want to have a healthy relationship with this person, because it takes a willingness to be vulnerable to hear what they're going to say. But that's another way to start to uncover and see, because we can't see what's right in front of us. It's the same way that we can watch a celebrity on television, and maybe we watch like something where it's like, oh my gosh, this person is another relationship that looks like the last one. And you don't even know them. You're just watching from a distance on TV and going, you know so much about their life from their patterns, because they have blind spots just like we do, right? So at a distance, you actually have a neutral lens to see these things. So if you have a friend that has your best interest, they can actually help maybe point you to a couple of things. And then what you can do is start to kind of work on that, because again, shadow work, we're looking for an emotional charge. So you know that if your friend says something, and if you have a reaction, like a little bit of a charge to it, a little bit like, oh, I don't like that, but there's something there, they've actually given you an amazing gift and a doorway in to start kind of working.
Those are great. Those are fantastic tips.
They're
I
two
love
of my
that. And that's
favorites.
something anyone could start literally right now.
Yeah,
So
right.
that's incredible. Sorry, I'm still processing those. I'm like thinking, okay, which friend,
Right. I know it is a big responsibility too. And I'll tell you, I did it with someone, and my friend was like, she was a little upset with me. Not really, but a little like, really? You want me to answer that? And I'm like, it's okay. I trust you. Please just let it loose. Just tell me what you're going to say. And maybe it's good. There was once when I asked her that question, it was actually very insightful. But one of the things she also said to me was something like, I don't think you understand the value you give. You just give so freely. And I wonder what it would be like if you would start to maybe appreciate yourself as much as other people appreciate you. And at first I was like, oh, right. But it resonated. And when she said that, I thought, okay, that's a gift, right? I can work on that. And I was so grateful for that little snippet, because here's the truth. We can spend 15, 20, 30 years trying to figure that out, when someone can just like that, here you go. And if you're willing, that can save you significant time in your process of healing, integration, just moving forward in your life, freeing yourself up from these things. So yeah, it's intense, but it's good work.
But it's so true. It's such good advice. Like, I'm thinking of, my best friend and what I see, and I know she sees things in me, but I mean, I like to think I'm very self-aware, but I know that there's things I'm missing, right? And I mean, gosh, what were we, 12 when we met? 42 now?
She
So
really
she's
knows.
got to, she'll know me, yes. And she helps edit my podcast, so she'll definitely be hearing this.
Amazing. Oh, so she really probably
Um,
sees that's great.
but so you did introduce yourself, but you didn't brag about yourself enough, because you've got books, you're a teacher, author, you've got all kinds of stuff. So for those that are listening that want to learn more or reach into you more, read more, can you do a little bragging and tell us all the things that you have?
Oh, well, thank you. So the easiest thing is going to be to go to my website, melissacorter.com. On my website, I've got all sorts of stuff. We have programs that are going on. I have a private mentoring, shadow work experience that I do with clients. I have group mentoring where we work with fairy tales and shadow work. And then one of my favorite things lately is Substack. I started writing on Substack. And for those of you that don't know what that is, it's kind of new. I think it's only been out a year now, but it's basically like a blogging platform where you don't have to censor yourself. So I share a lot on there. I get into some of these topics. I do have free articles and membership. I think it's up to like 200 words or something like that. And then other articles that are just free. And then for paid subscribers, it's still pretty accessible. I think it's like $5 a month or something like that. So it isn't too crazy. But I love this space. You can connect with me on there. We message on there. You can read articles. You can tell me what you want me to write about or talk about. And it's one of my favorite things to engage with people. So if you go to my website, all that information is on there as well to find it all.
And we'll have your website and things linked in the show notes here so that they can just click right away. And what about your book?
Oh my gosh. So I have so many books out. Well, the one I'm really excited about, it's coming out in 2025. So it's not here yet, but I'm calling it my big girl book. It's with a bigger publisher and it's all about this stuff. It's all about shadow work. So we don't have the title nailed down, but one of the things that I can share about it is I use fairy tales as a way for us to kind of see some of our patterns and our habits and cycles. And then I give a little bit of like an experience of how to do that. So it's going to be amazing. I'm excited about it. It does focus on all the more intense sides of the personality. So it's going to be 9 different themes. And they're really intense, but they're magical and amazing. And so that'll be out September of 2025. I'm so excited.
Oh, I can see why you're excited because you're doing all the work on it right now.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yes.
And you've said fairy tales a few times, and I know I mentioned it in the beginning. I definitely want to bring you back to dive into if any listeners, if you go on our website or look about her, there's things about the dreams and nightmares, like we discussed, to the psychology of fairy tales, and I would love to hear like little snippets of it for sure. So we don't have time today, I guess we could keep talking, but I'm sure people would eventually stop listening at, couple hour mark, so we'll bring back. But I love that's such a great way, just in my mind, like a way to get people excited, even who might be hesitant, like a way to kind of link that together with fairy tales. So I think that's really, really neat. So yes, definitely we should wrap this up. There's so much more I have, but I will save it. Melissa, is there anything that I missed that you might want to share? Not on the topics we'll cover next time, but on anything we talked about today?
No, just thank you so much for the opportunity. And I just think this was a great way to help people attune to the idea of shadow work, to see that it's accessible for them, that it doesn't have to be anything crazy. You can start where you're at and have quite a bit of progress just doing that. And really just trust yourself. Trust yourself. The more you trust, the more you will get those intuitive feelings, hits, and synchronistic moments, which are so fun. So fun.
The trust yourself is perfect. That's like an overarching theme of pretty much every guest has something to say about trust yourself.
Wow.
Use self-expression, intuition, like all of that. So everybody's coming at it from different ways, and we're learning because one size is not fits all, right? So maybe a different person that we had on or a different method they've learned before did not resonate, and this one does. So I'm so glad we were able to bring you here and do that. So thank you so much for coming. So everything will be in the show notes. That everything about Melissa, all the ways that you can get in touch with her. And as always, please follow, like, subscribe, share, definitely share. There's people that haven't found me yet, haven't found the Gothic Heart, and you can share Melissa's info, this episode, any of that with them. And it would be a great starting point for them as well. So thank you again, and we'll see you guys on the next episode. Bye.